Good evening, and welcome to this week's Black Mental Health is Black Health. I'm your host, Bronwyn Lucas, Miss B for short, and I've got some great guests here that I'll introduce in a moment. But if you've ever been here before, you know we start off with some deep cleansing breaths. And if you haven't been here before, let me tell you how we do it and why. We all sometimes need a woosah moment, and you may have had a good day, bad day, busy day, slow day, but it's a time to just kind of push the day aside and allow you to focus. Deep breathing is something you can do yourself anytime, day or night, to help just calm your own self down. So here's what I want you to do: lightly place your hands on your stomach. The reason you're going to do that, when I say breathe in, you're going to breathe in so deeply you're going to feel your stomach expanding because you're taking oxygen not just to your chest, it's going all the way down through your lungs. And when I say breathe out, you will exhale. So we'll take 3 or 4 deep breaths. And I'll count to 4 slowly, and you breathe in slowly. You'll breathe in and out on my count. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. That was our woosah moment. How did that feel, guys, for you, Lori, Wayne? How did that feel?
Feel pretty good right now.
Yeah. And I always like to say that's something you can do any time of the day or night. You in traffic and that driver is getting on your nerves. Take a breath. You don't need to be the one exhibiting road rage. Well, I have two exciting guests here tonight, and I'm going to, of course, let them introduce themselves and tell us something cool about them. So, first on the screen is Lori Wilson. Tell us about yourself. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Lori Wilson. I am the program director, founder, owner of Changing How I Live Life Outpatient Services here in Austin, Texas. We provide outpatient substance abuse services as well as the DWI Intervention Education Program. Something cool about myself is I like hanging out with my kids.
That's cool. And it's good to see parents still want to say that, that that's not even the norm. It should be, but that's awesome.
Mm.
Wayne, tell us about you.
Hello, my name is Wayne Lovins. I'm down here in Austin, Texas as well. I'm a licensed chemical dependency counselor. So, one thing that's cool about me is that by His grace, I have the opportunity of being sober for the last 35 years. And now I have an opportunity to impact others' lives as a result of my being sober. So, and that's fantastic. So,
And I think what's also cool about that is that you do use it as a platform. It's like, okay, been there, done that, but you're not going to just leave it there. You're going to go help others. So I think that's cool that you guys are taking that route. Awesome. So tonight we were asked to talk about opioids, fentanyl, but we're going to take it a little step further, but that's where we're starting off.
mhm.
And it's really directed for parents to get an idea: what do you do with this stuff
Mm.
called opioids, fentanyl, drugs that your kids are taking? So I want to start off, I guess, in general. When we hear that term opioids, there are a lot of people who don't even know what that means. Lori, could you tell us what are opioids?
Opioids are synthetic heroin, oxycontin, hydrocodone, um, those kind of those kind of medications that are prescribed by doctors for pain initially.
So opioids are initially legal drugs. If you're
Yeah,
saying it's oxycontin, these
prescription.
prescription, they legal.
Prescription. So,
There, you can go get them. Well, what? Um, there are some names. Yeah, say those names again, and that we don't think of often as being synthetic heroin because they are prescription drugs. So Oxycontin, and what else?
Hydrocodone, mostly any kind of pain pill, any
Vicodin,
Vicodin,
codeine.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mostly any pain pill. They actually give you fentanyl in the hospital for surgery.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean it's used legally.
Right. They have a legal use or prescription use, but as we're going to discover later, that's not what the kind we're talking about. So, Wayne, tell us about fentanyl. I know there are different delivery methods. So,
Well,
what's the difference?
well, fentanyl is another synthetic, you know, opioid that is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. And it's used primarily for, like in cancer patients and things of that effect, or either people coming out of severe surgeries where they need, stuff to recover from pain and stuff. So that's where it generated from, and that's where it came into play for us. It's been around for some time, so it's not like it's a new item on the market. It's just the way today that it's being utilized on the market. So I mean, fentanyl comes in like fentanyl patches. It can be it can be absorbed in the skin. Um, there's a lot of different forms of fentanyl that you can have, but what makes it a problem is when they chop it up in powder, they put it in blotter like acid, they put it in candies, they make it, gummies. I mean, when they start mixing it with other stuff, the and creating their own little batch of whatever it is, and they put fentanyl label on it, that's where we come to play where it becomes a big issue. So
Because
It's
you don't know
altered
what you're mixing.
from
It's
it's
what?
altered from it's altered from its original state.
Mm,
it's no longer the
Yeah.
legal
And
prescribed
so
thing
that
that you went in there for surgery with. Now it's
and
being used for leisure or to
yeah.
get high. And I mean the problem with that is that it's like I said, it's 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. So this stuff is
wow.
so potent that it doesn't require much at all. It absorb into the skin like 20 minutes. So and after that, it was generated for like to absorb into the body for and get in there in 1 to 3 days, then it's in there. So it stays in there. So you don't be in that constant pain. It keeps you out of that
Mm,
pain. So that's how potent that stuff is. But when people just use it like off the bat, like it's, just to get high, then not realizing the potency of it, then that can cause a problem as well. Because, you can get dizzy, start vomiting. I mean, and there's some drugs that can't even be used with fentanyl. I mean, you can't use alcohol with fentanyl. You're not supposed to breastfeed with fentanyl. I mean, there's a lot of things, even when it's legally prescribed, you can't do with fentanyl. They don't require you to drive, request that you don't drive when you're under the influence of fentanyl. When I had my colonoscopy, they had me sitting down over there, recuperating over there, and I had to be driven home, wheel me out in a wheelchair, and then somebody had to drive me. So it's one of those kind of things. So people more familiar with the fentanyl when it goes into like the Michael Jackson thing or the Prince deal when they
mm.
were the liquid form, when doing it that way. So. Uh, the legal use has been abused and then turned into other forms to where it can be utilized. Like like I said, they chop it up in powder, they put it in candies, they make candies out of it. Um, you know, put it on blotter like blotter acid, put it on sheets and take it like that. Through nasal, through eye drops.
Mm.
So when you start utilizing all those different ways on the streets, then that's where the problem is. That's when the illegal use of the substance.
Wow, in so many different ways a person can do that. How does it get to kids? And then we have parents watching. How does it even get to children? How is it so easily available now? Either of you.
Ms. Wilson?
It's is cheap, first of all. Um, and it's like it's trending.
Mm-hmm.
It's a trend right now. And so and the way that it's marketed is marketed, to look like it's a Skittle,
Mm-hmm.
or M&M, or
Mm-hmm.
something, and so when you got teenagers that's just sitting around and somebody has a bright idea, um, but you can get the ingredients and all that off the dark website, and they got pill pressing machines that they just make it, in their bedroom. They can make it in their bedroom. So they don't know, because they say like a granule, like the is a lot. Like that's the
Yeah.
50 times more stronger, like
Mm-hmm.
just that much, right? And so they're not, doctors or scientists, and so they don't know how much they putting
Mm-hmm.
in there. Um, and the other thing too is that kids want to see, people want to see what's gonna happen if you take it. So it's party drug, whatever it is, so and you may just not even know that it's anything other than a Skittle.
Mm-hmm.
So you may not even know.
Yeah.
So I know another form that they were using, they were mixing it with ecstasy at one
Yeah.
time. So that was another way you getting people into it, because people were doing all the X, and it was a legal drug before it got ruled out. MDMA. I mean, ecstasy was legal, and people just doing ecstasy, and then they started making their own ecstasy. So then that's when it became a problem. And it was a man-made drug to begin with, but then they started doing the other experiments with it
Mm-hmm.
on the Black Street side of it. So mixing the fentanyl with the ecstasy, and that kind of stuff. And then people do that and then automatically die because
Yeah.
of the potency.
Mm-hmm. And not knowing what they're mixing.
Not knowing exactly. They don't even know what's in there. They just think they're doing some ecstasy, and boom.
I have heard that the age of a drug addict has changed from what it was, let's say back in the 80s or 90s. What do you guys think about that? Does it look the same?
No, it doesn't look the same at all. It looks a lot younger than it was prior to, because back in the 80s, I mean, the average person you were looking at coming down off of heroin or detoxing heroin was like 30 or 35. And today, you know like I said, it's so trendy, and it's like a candy, and it's Skittles, like, that's entertaining to like people just coming in high school, 15, 16,
Hmm.
17.
Do you
and
think?
and,
Oh, go on,
and
Lori.
when you're talking about you know I using words like um drug addicts, I don't define folks.
Hmm.
You get to define yourself, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's especially when we're talking about adolescents. Um, you know, they do stuff, smoke weed, take pills, drink, and then they go on to bigger and better things, and they just done with that. And then it's other folks who are more prone to addiction, who just kind of get stuck
Hmm.
and using drugs, and we don't know who those people are. So
Right.
No.
everybody that use drugs or using drugs, you know, they they may or may not be an addict. They just using drugs and alcohol because it's available.
Or the
And that's a very good
experimentation
point.
stage,
But now,
15, 16, 17, experimenting,
Right.
just if
but
they live.
dependency, when we're talking about dependency,
Oh, yeah.
dependency is a different thing than like your addict, right? So you can be one of those people that went in, legitimately had surgery, needed to use pain medication, and your body became dependent on it.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So it can happen like that. um but your body don't know the difference between illegal substances and what the doctor prescribed. It just knows that it
It
likes
needs
it.
it. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
It
so
wants
does
some
it
more.
happen the first time you ever use drugs or the 100th time that you use
Hmm.
drugs that you become addicted. We don't know. We don't know. And so, it's a brain disease, and addiction is a brain disease, um, and it's usually manifested out in your behavior, like so uh, that's what we see.
And
Is
it,
is
mhm. And
is
when you think about the teens who are experimenting, they don't know. You can't tell. Like you say, if
No,
this one is
no.
just going to hit you and you're going to be hooked, or you're going to take it and say, you know what, I didn't even like it. And
Hmm.
that is the thing. No one knows, and there is no magic or crystal ball or no formula to say if you do it, this will happen to you. If you do it, this will happen to you. There is no way of knowing that. So with that in mind, um,
and you
what do
may
you?
not even get a chance to decide whether or
Mhm.
not you liked it.
Mm,
That might be
that's
your
One
one
and
and
only.
done, one and done.
with the
So
Right.
fentanyl. That is very true.
yeah,
It's highly.
Because you don't know where you're taking. I used to tell kids, you trust in a drug dealer means you trust in somebody who's breaking the law. You just stop and let's say
Hmm.
I know who I'm getting, but you trust in somebody who is breaking the law. So that's an interesting concept to me. But that is what we'll say. What about what are some things parents can look for? We're gonna get into talking about the opioid and how it's looked at. But I want to know before we get into it, what are some things you can say to parents? What should they be looking for?
a change in behavior.
Hmm.
A change in behavior, a change in activities, change in peer group. Um, you know, changing your interaction with them. And it's real difficult because teenagers just naturally, without anything, it's when they get to be teenagers, you just gonna bump up against some
Hmm.
stuff. Um, so you know, so teenagers are gonna be teenagers, and it don't you can have five teenage kids living in the same house and raised by the exact same people doing the exact same thing, but they all have different personalities.
Hmm.
So what works and for this one kid may not, and so you got to be real creative with that. And so you just got to know your kid. But when they start, pushing back, at that point you don't want to be bothered with them. Just get
Hmm.
out of my face. Just gone. Um, and so they make it hard to live to live with them, and so that things start happening, and so you have to stay in it.
And the time that they get you to feeling like I don't want to be bothered is the time you need to be more in their face.
Exactly.
Wayne, what would you say to parents? What are some things you can say about looking out for?
Well, I mean, what I'm trying to log this thing is did something on me, but what I would say is get into their business, which they don't particularly care for, as being very close into their business and being real close to who they associate with and what and the crowds and the things that they're doing is uh is one of the areas where you can definitely be where you can understand where you can see some differences right away, and pay close attention to them and just don't be naive about certain things that happen as if they're just having a long day or they're just tired or they're just doing this or something. Pay very close attention to certain things, like Lori was saying, like changes that may happen uh, abruptly. Just all of a sudden, something changes.
Mhm.
A change in behavior, a change in patterns, a change in the way you're doing things, a loss of interest in sports. Now you don't want to play sports anymore. Now you just want to hang around. And I'm just going over to a friend's or library or it's those kind of things pay very close attention to because those are usually telltale signs that something else is happening.
So true. I want to bring up another drug. I know the focus is fentanyl, opioids, because that's in the news, it's in the media, and we're going to
Hmm.
get to that in a second. But marijuana,
Mm,
they all doing it. It's no big deal. Half the states say it's legal. It's not
it's
in
legal.
Texas. but you can get CBD, you can get this. What role does that play in all of this?
Whew. I think it opens the doors for just about anything else to be possible for us. Uh, any other drugs that can be used is, I mean, marijuana is, I mean, people look at it so lightly because there are medical benefits to marijuana, for glaucoma and, different types of other ailments that people have. And so those are registered ailments that those people have, but the other people just smoking to be smoking.
Mhm.
And so when marijuana is looked at so lightly, and you can go around the corner and get a bud, or you can get a, a gummy, per se, that's 50 times the strength of a joint, so and be high, and it's not visible, it doesn't smell, and you can just be in the crowd with everybody just going along high and everything. No one knows what's going on. But I think it's actually uh, a gateway to lots of other activity that's out there. If you try the gummies, then someone can give you, then you'll try a Skittle. I mean, not saying that everyone will, just you're in that
Mhm.
atmosphere and you're engaged in that process and you're partying, and then you have some drug affected behavior and you just say yes when normally you would say no.
It definitely opens that door. And what do you think about that, Lori?
Um, marijuana in itself is just so different now.
Yes.
It's
Hmm.
something. We used to have a really good argument back for it back in the day. It was the herb God made it, and it came from the ground. But now you're just growing that in your closet in water, and they adding all kind of
Mhm.
chemicals to it in the first place, and so that makes it 35% more potent
Mhm.
than your average, out of the ground marijuana. So,
Yeah, honey.
yeah, and it comes in, dispensaries, like people are growing marijuana, like you want, olives, you want black olives, you want green olives, you want red olives,
Mhm.
it's like you got a selection. They name it, it's called something, you know, and it's people that are educated on that, and um, so when you go to places, but people in Texas, because we live in Texas, and it's legal in other places like Colorado, right? And people just think you can just go to Colorado and just smoke, and it's all happy time. But the reason that it's not legal in Texas is because Texas they're watching how it works in other states,
Hmm.
and what we know is that black market is still winning.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Oh
It,
yeah.
it costs too much to have a dispensary.
All them
Like
taxes and all
you
that stuff.
tax too much.
Right.
Yeah, and so now you don't have no oversight. You don't have any oversight. We've never had oversight, and
Mm-mm.
so you don't know when I roll a blunt, and sell it to you. You don't really know what's in the blunt, right?
Nope, you don't.
So so um so yeah, I mean, we have been known to do stuff with blunts, marijuana. Well, I come from the era of white paper joints, so I
Mhm.
smoked joints. I didn't smoke blunts.
Mhm.
So, but it's other stuff. So it's not as black and white. Like one day you
Mhm.
running around and you're a happy kid, and the next day you using drugs. It's like it's a progression.
Mhm.
And it's usually an outward expression of some inward problems.
Right. So
That
often.
yeah, so that they may or may not be able to talk about, or some trauma. You know, um, we don't know, and so
Any
um,
trauma?
yeah, and
You.
so we all know that in my family, in the community I came from, it's like, um, it didn't really matter what was happening. Sun was shining, somebody died, somebody was born. You just, you did what you did. You got high, you drank, kind of stuff, and so a lot of that is influenced by observation. and role modeling. So if you got older siblings, uncles, or aunts, or whoever that's sitting around, parents mostly, that's using marijuana, because those are the people that want it to be legal. Is the adults, right? I can't wait to get
Hmm.
legal in Texas. Uh,
Mhm.
but when you ask them if they want their kids to smoke marijuana, they don't want their kids to smoke
Right.
marijuana.
No, no.
You know what
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
they,
saying?
that's some
So
of them.
and
yeah,
we were talking about
That's some of them.
the difference in the marijuana today and the difference in marijuana years ago. You used to hear about people getting, you had the munchies when you got high.
Hmm.
You smoke weed,
Get
you got the
smoke, get the
munchies.
munchies,
Now
want to eat,
they don't want to
laughing.
do that. And I was talking to a psychiatrist and about this, and we were saying if you see the difference because they're putting so many things, it's not that natural herb anymore, and because you're putting
Hmm.
so many things in it, it has become more of a depressant. And they
Hmm.
smoke, and they're just you see it, you see that flat effect, and they're no, I don't need to eat. I'm just, So it's so different that even that, the marijuana is different. And with the dispensaries, because, we got this kind, you want some of this, you want some of this, you want some of this, that some of this is adding something to it. And it is
Hmm.
no longer just that natural herb from the ground. So you're right, Lori, that argument's gone. You can't say that.
No, that's over with. Yeah.
and I mean, like the tobacco companies are not making. It's like we used to have straight black and miles, right?
Black and mild.
Now they come
Hmm.
in grape, strawberry, mango flavored. And so that's the paper that, they cutting it out, taking the tobacco out, putting the weed in it. So those are, so they making, things to make it more attractive. People
Hmm.
know that if you smoke cigars, you don't really want, not a cigar smoker, you don't want to smoke grape cigars.
Right.
But it's like, but when you're putting weed in there, I'm like, what
Hmm.
kind is this? Oh, that's kind of
So who is that?
thing, so
Also, let you know who that's targeted to the
Right. Let's
adolescent.
see.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
Hmm.
going to be appealing to
yeah,
cherry and grape and yeah. So
You're right. The adult doesn't want that.
mm-hmm.
It's targeted to them,
yeah.
and these are things that parents don't realize. Even though Black and Miles come in flavors. What?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Again, because that's their target audience. Oh, another thing we're talking about smoking, vaping.
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, but Wayne, what you got about vaping? We're talking to people who may have children, nieces, nephews, aunts, cousins, neighbors. What can you tell them about vaping?
Well, I can share from my experience that everything comes out of that little vape is not tobacco. Let's just say that. Because I mean, you got concentrated marijuana pens that they vaping marijuana in. You
Yeah.
know, 10 times, 100 times the strength of regular marijuana. They vaping that. A couple of draws on that, man, and like woo. So it's vaping is another gateway. It opens the doors for other things because normally the vape was just for cigarettes, tobacco. So
Hmm.
now, we got concentrated marijuana,
And
and
that's something parents need to worry about even more, the vaping, more than the opioids and fentanyl in terms of its accessibility.
hmm because they're thinking about when they think of the vaping, they're just smoking cigarettes, but it's not tobacco. They have concentrated marijuana in there, and or other people when they're vaping, they put other little traces of little, you can put anything in that vape,
Hmm.
you know, cocaine, you can put whatever you want in it and be smoking. Just like the hookah, in the hookah bars, they putting that stuff in there, smoking all this flavorful hookah and stuff, and then so we know you got a flavorful rock going on in there. So some cocaine go off in the hookah pipe. So I mean, anything can go in the hookah, just like
Hmm.
anything can go into the vape.
Right. And now teens make their own homemade hookah pipes out of water bottles,
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
you
Oh
know.
yeah,
And so, parents look around, why you got all these water bottles in your room and you don't even drink water?
and it's just
In terms of
flavored
what you need. Yeah. Oh, I
flavored
was
smoke.
drinking water. Uh-huh. It's healthy. I need to drink more water. And yeah, okay. I never see you drinking water, but I see all these empty bottles. In
All
terms of
these empty
what
bottles.
you need to look for, it's
Hmm.
for real. This is the kind of stuff this kind of things that's really going on. Um, I want to go back to opioids, fentanyl, and crack. And I'm going to tell you what
Mm,
my thought about that. You know, we hear so much now about the opioid crisis, and it's a crisis.
mm-hmm.
Um, but when crack was affecting our neighborhoods because it was placed in our neighborhoods,
The black community.
oh, it was just, you just cracking it. You weren't
Mm,
someone who had a drug problem. And it wasn't a crisis, and we didn't need to help. But
mm-mm,
opioids, oh, we need to help these poor little children. Now, I feel race has a whole lot to do with that. So I'm asking you, you know, we hear about this opioids, and we know that a lot of it, the can be too expensive for us to even try to get. And as I said,
mm-hmm,
parents need to worry about this new form of marijuana, and vaping is really more of a threat in our community because you can get it easier. And the
mm-hmm.
fentanyl and the opioids are so dangerous and lethal. Yes, you get that, you can be dead off of that one hit. But there's so many other things. What do you guys think about this whole my whole idea of it's a problem because it started impacting little white kids.
Absolutely. So it became a problem when it started affecting the white kids. That's when it's a major problem. When some of the senators' daughters and sons and all that stuff get addicted and get arrested or overdose or something happens, then it's an epidemic. But as you said, I mean, when crack was in placed in the neighborhoods, and they were just crackheads, so they would bring them over there and arrest the crackheads and charge them, and put, these felonies on their records so that when they got out, they can't get housing, can't get food stamps, they can't get nothing with this felony because they were crack, so that whole thing has changed now. So, with this ordeal with the epidemic now that it's affecting those other people. So
And even
it's
with
a
the
shame, but it's true.
and even in the time of the crack cocaine era, cocaine was treated differently than crack because
Yes.
cocaine was done in one neighborhood, crack was done in another. And opioids are done in the same neighborhood as cocaine. So the what are the laws about cocaine? I mean about opioids. I don't even know.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, as far as what they say and what I've seen, fentanyl is, that's what it's coming in as fentanyl. They're making some major changes now to where if you get caught with it or if you distributed it and someone dies and you charge for murder. So they're really
Mhm.
making some changes now with it, just because of the widespread and the way it's taken off all over the world, as far as people using it and people dying. So that's the thing that's really changed about that part. I mean, opposed to the crack epidemic when that was going on, like you said, crack was 10 years, cocaine was probation,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
no felony.
And
Right.
so it's how, one is called an epidemic, and the other one was called a war on drugs,
Mhm.
Mm, yeah.
right? So, and so how we dealt with it, you know, uh, crack came out around the same time that HIV came out, right? And so those were two epidemics that annihilated the African American community.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So because and that's also the era that um, the government started charging people who were in possession of crack cocaine, and they were distributing it as a federal offense because it was tied to conspiracy and tax evasion. So, so those kind of, so it just, so, federal prisons were not necessarily designed for crack dealers. It
Hmm.
was designed for white collar crime, people,
Hmm.
embezzling bank money and all of that. And so you go to a federal prison and a state prison, it is vastly different. and
Night and day.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So so the way that it's being handled, like we're not hearing, people are dying, they're getting the drugs from somewhere, but we're not hearing about anybody getting arrested. We're not hearing about any big bust, anything like that. Um, and so it just trickles down. It's trickled down to the other side of town, and so it just becomes something else. First of all, oxycontin itself, that particular drug specifically, when they pharmacies put that out, they sold that to the community of being a non-addictive painkiller.
Mm.
Originally, it was a
Mhm.
non-addictive painkiller originally, and so now we see, you know, that's not true. And so you can't maintain that kind of habit for a long period of time, oxycontin, unless you just got access to it. And so eventually, you're gonna do you're gonna do something different. Like you're gonna start using a cheaper form to get the same effect.
Mm.
And that's usually heroin.
Yep.
You might stop taking a pill. You might start snorting it instead. It's quicker, absorb in the bloodstream. Then somebody might introduce a syringe. And so it's a progression. Like you are conscious, you making conscious decisions about this, right? Like it's not like it just happens to an individual. Like you show up for it. Like, but we don't know. We don't know anything about addiction. We don't know that, you know, that's not ever the nobody wakes up and today I think I'm gonna turn myself into a drug addict so I can be
Mhm.
homeless and steal from my family. That's not how that starts out,
Nope.
you know. And it just gets away from you, and you don't know you got a habit until you got a habit. And so it's not so, like I said, it's like sometimes people just do this and then they go on to bigger and better thing. Then other times people just get stuck um and doing this, getting high. I got stuck in getting high. Like that was a favorite pastime.
And I think that's another message to parents. You can get stuck there, like you say. I was just stuck in that space. I got in that space. I liked it. Didn't want to get out of it, and but it can take you downward. So that high really becomes low. It takes you to a
Mm.
low point in your life because you're constantly high. Um, yeah. What were you going to say, Laura? It looked like you ready to say something.
Yeah, and for myself, like, it was some rules to the game, right? For me, like I kept a job.
Mm-hmm.
I kept a job, I was productive, you know, um, stay up all night doing getting high, whatever. Still went to work the next day because you got a job, you get dope on credit. That was my thing.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't look like, addiction doesn't look like the person under the bridge who's homeless.
yes.
That's not what addiction looks like. So we have to be real careful because a lot of time that's how in real time, adults don't think that they have a problem because that's their measuring stick
Hmm.
for whether or not, so when I start looking like that, then I got a problem. But then when you start looking like that, now you gotta find something else to look like. Well, when I start looking like that right there,
Hmm.
so um and so it's not a one and done, like, okay, now I'm just sitting around, I'm just getting high. I mean, you got people that binge use, what I'm saying, they might not use for 6 months, another year, but when they do what they do, that's what they do. Some people
Mm-hmm.
use drugs only when they drink, and they might only drink
Mm-hmm.
every 6 months. You know, so it's like that compulsion, obsession and compulsion. That's the part, that drives people to. That's when we start talking about addiction.
And you know something I wanted to point out for parents that, like you said, the adult, you think this drug addict, this person under the bridge, they're just out. And so my child's not a drug addict. They go to school every day.
Mm-hmm.
They not no, they don't have a problem because they at school and they got good grades. And well, their grades might be slipping a little, but they still passing everything. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to open our minds to it's there isn't just this little box of what someone who is addicted or someone who's about to become addicted, your
Mm.
child who is going down that path. We don't know what they look like. Guess what, y'all? We're almost out of time. I told you, the
Wow.
time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like,
What
what?
happened? Where'd it go?
Where'd it
Where'd it
go?
go?
It
Where'd it
Well,
didn't
go?
fly.
let me say this when we're
Yeah.
talking about kids, right? Like
Mhm,
that's my favorite population of folks to work with. Like if
Mine too.
I got a choice, I like working with
mhm,
adolescents because they're so raw,
mhm,
and because they haven't developed, they're not real sophisticated in their maneuvering, trying to be slick kind of stuff. And so, it's like we done that. We already did that. Stop
mhm,
it. Um, so I think the biggest epidemic that we're dealing with now is just being hopeless.
Mm.
That's the epidemic. It's like when you look around, when they look around, what are we giving them to look at?
Mm.
And it's like with adolescents, we tend to focus on adolescents because they are doing something, and it's usually something negative,
mhm,
right? So there's no positive reinforcement. So really, the only attention that I'm getting is this negative attention, and negative attention is better than no attention,
mhm,
Done
you
none
know.
at all.
But in my work, the kids that I worked with were in juvenile court, right? And so if I get a parent that, suspected their kid may be smoking marijuana and they want to try to get him some help or whatever, you almost cannot get help until you already in trouble.
Right. That is where our system is set
That's
up.
the problem.
Yeah. And
Mhm,
so
That's the problem.
and it's no resources for parents in the community, because it's like how do, even if my kid, like Al-Anon, right? Like
Hmm.
Al-Anon adults, it's like the
mhm,
spouse goes to the Al-Anon meeting to learn how to, stop enabling, right? So parents have to learn that too. If you give your kid $5 every day for lunch, but you get reports that they not going to school, well, you don't need no lunch money.
mhm.
You know what I'm saying? If you
Exactly.
not going to school, you don't need no new school clothes.
Right.
Kind of
Money for school
thing.
clothes.
Yeah. And so and they'll trade and sell stuff
Anything.
and all of that, so you have to we have to give our kids something else to look at. And I think it's real important that kids start at an early age being engaged in in activities, at school, because it's a commitment to that too. One, you got to keep your grades up. Two, it's like, and so it's like what you instill, the values and
Mhm.
morals, and you still gonna get some pushback because they're kids, and we don't want them to go through what we went through, so we just live in that fear all the time anyway, and we think we know more than them, so you know. So we're gonna tell them, and it's not their experience because they haven't had it,
Right.
and
We
Exactly.
have
so
to
we
let
have
them
to,
have their experience.
yeah. And so kids are just a smaller version of us. They
Yeah.
they got a brain. They know how to think, and so we have to start challenging that thought process instead of like dictating uh, what you're gonna do, what you're not gonna do. This my house. You can get out, kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Not really. Not really. You can't get out. It's just the law say you can't put your kids out at 15.
Right.
So when
Yeah, and
we
I
stop and start listening and paying attention to what's going on. Your kids will tell you they'll get, but it has to be a safe space for them to be able
Hmm.
to do that and don't have to worry about the repercussions. Because now I'm not
Yeah.
gonna tell you anything,
So that's the important key there is create the safe space where y'all have that open communication where y'all can always communicate with one another. That's
and we
key
ain't talking about no
in a
best
relationship.
friend. My
No,
child is my best
no,
friend.
No,
No,
your
no,
child is
no.
your child.
yeah.
We are at the end of the time, and we didn't get a chance to talk about, and I'll maybe have you back one day and talk about the idea of harm reduction. And for
Oh,
those
yeah.
of you who have never heard of harm reduction, I'm not even going to try.
Just leave
Just
that
look it
alone.
up. Look
Just
it
leave
up.
it alone. Just leave it alone.
We cannot even introduce it without talking about it. But I always like to end my show with a call to action. The call to action is, what can you do as a result of listening today? So for parents, as it's been said, communicate with your children. Watch your children. They're living in your house. You're feeding and financing them. See what's going on. If things begin to change, if their friends begin to change, don't be afraid to ask. Have that conversation. You'd rather ask and offend your child than have your child dead from an overdose of anything. You smell
Yes.
something
True.
funny, find out what it is. Be open to those communications and realize you're not in this by yourself. Get help. If your child
Hmm.
is going down a road that you're like, they can't do that, get help. It's out there. Don't be afraid to ask. It's time out for what happens in this house stays in this house. People are dying because of that. And my last call to action is always, always, always be an educated voter. How does that fit? The laws we have in place can impact your life. It can impact how we treat someone who has fentanyl versus somebody who has weed, and what they're gonna how they're gonna be treated, by the justice system. So
Mm.
be an educated voter. Know who you're voting for, know what you want, what you need, and be able to get that. I want to thank my guests, Lori Wilson and Wayne Lovings, for joining today and really helping enlighten us on fentanyl, opioids, the new marijuana, as I call it, um, vaping, and all these things that are impacting our children, young adults, and yes, our adults. So thank you again for joining us. You were quite
Thank you for
informative.
having us.
All right. And the rest of you, see you next week.
Okie dokie.